He had nothing, less than nothing, just a biting wind, clothes that were barely rags, and fingers so numb they felt like foreign objects. Yet, in his frozen arms, he cradled everything that mattered in that moment, a life, flickering like a dying candle. She was an unconscious whisper of elegance against the storm's fury, lips an alarming blue. But around her neck, a cascade of diamonds glittered, impossibly bright, a cruel mockery of warmth. Arthur, a forgotten man, faced an impossible choice: succumb to Blizzard himself, or fight for the stranger, this diamond-clad secret, and somehow find a path to a life he couldn't even imagine. The mansion lights in the distance were a cruel taunt, but his eyes, burning with a desperate fire, were fixed on them. Arthur hadn't always known this gnawing cold, this constant ache of hunger. There was a time his hands, now cracked and bleeding, were deft with tools, shaping wood into things of purpose and beauty. He'd been Arthur Miller, carpenter, husband to his beloved Sarah. Their small cottage had echoed with laughter and the scent of sawdust. But Sarah's illness had been a relentless storm of its own, sweeping away their savings, then the workshop, then their home. After she was gone, grief became his only companion, the streets his unwelcome refuge. Now, his days were a relentless search for scraps of warmth, for a sheltered doorway to fend off the night. His tattered blanket, a ghost of comfort, was his most prized possession. Yet, even in the depths of his despair, a stubborn ember of kindness glowed within him. Just that morning, huddled near a bakery vent for its fleeting warmth, he'd found half a discarded bread roll. His stomach had growled, a hollow ache. But then he'd seen the scrawny stray dog, shivering even more than he was, its ribs showing. With a sigh, Arthur had broken off the larger piece and offered it. The dog had devoured it, then licked his numb fingers, a brief, trusting warmth. "There now," Arthur had murmured, a rare smile touching his chapped lips. "At least one of us had a decent breakfast." He never begged, always offering a bit of work if anyone had it, his pride a fragile shield. It was this quiet empathy, this memory of what it meant to care, that the city's harshness hadn't managed to freeze. Miles away, in a world of polished marble and hushed opulence, Eleanor Ashworth felt a different kind of cold. Trapped in the gilded cage of her immense inheritance, her life was a series of expectations dictated by her powerful, emotionally distant father, Harrison. Today, she was en route to the sprawling Ashworth country estate for the annual Christmas charade, a performance of family unity she found increasingly unbearable. Just before leaving, she tried, once again, to talk to her father about her desire to volunteer at a children's literacy program. He dismissed it curtly. "Nonsense, Eleanor. Your place is here, learning the family business. Philanthropy is for CCS release, not getting your hands dirty." The words, cool and final, had left a familiar ache of loneliness. As she settled into the chauffeured limousine, the heavy silk of her gown felt restrictive, the magnificent diamond necklace, her mother's legacy, a beautiful, cold weight. She yearned for something real, a genuine human connection, a purpose beyond boardrooms and society balls. The blizzard ascended without warning, a malevolent white beast swallowing the landscape. Gentle snowflakes transformed into a blinding, horizontal assault. Thomas, the young chauffeur, gripped the wheel, his face a mask of growing terror. "Visibility is 0, Miss Ashworth," he stammered, his voice tight. "Pull over, Thomas," Eleanor urged, her own heart beginning to pound. "We need to wait this out." But before he could react, the limousine hit a treacherous patch of black ice. The world spun into a sickening vortex of screeching metal and shattering glass. Eleanor's head cracked against the window with brutal force. A supernova of pain, then nothing but suffocating darkness. When a sliver of consciousness returned, Thomas was shaking her, his eyes wide with desperate youthful panic. "Miss Ashworth, Are you hurt? The wind howled outside, already seeping icy fingers through a broken window. My head. She managed, a wave of nausea washing over her. The car's dead, Thomas cried, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Radio's out. We're stuck. There was a village sign a few miles back. I have to get help. In this, Eleanor whispered, gazing at the impenetrable wall of white. You'll be killed. I have to try, he insisted, already fumbling with his door. My wife, my little girl, I promised I'd be home. Stay here. Keep warm. And then he was gone, swallowed by the storm in an instant, leaving Eleanor alone with the roaring wind and a dread so profound it chilled her to the bone. He wasn't coming back. The silence he left behind was the sound of her hope dying. Arthur, meanwhile, had felt the storm's early fury and knew his usual shelter beneath the crumbling underpass wouldn't hold. He remembered the distant glow of a grand house, seen on a previous day's desperate wander miles to the east. It was a faint hope, but any hope was better than none. Clutching the surprisingly diesel coat he'd salvaged from a bin just yesterday, a small miracle he'd almost left behind, he'd set out head bowed into the teeth of the wind. It was a cruel twist of fate, or perhaps something more profound, that guided his freezing feet. Through a momentary, deceptive thinning of the swirling snow, he saw it, a dark, unnatural shape, half buried in a drift, a mangled silhouette against the white. A car, and not just any car. Even through the storm, he could tell it was one of those luxurious machines, now grievously wounded. His own desperate need for shelter warred with a sudden, sharp premonition. Something was terribly wrong. He fought his way closer, the wind trying to scour him from the earth. He peered through a cracked, snow-caked window, and then his breath caught in his throat. A woman, slumped unnaturally in the passenger seat. Her expensive coat was askew, her face the color of ash, her lips the terrifying, deathly blue. He didn't hesitate. His own suffering, the gnawing hunger, the crushing cold, it all vanished, eclipsed by the primal urge to help. The passenger door was jammed. He battled around the car, the wind a relentless tormentor, until he found the driver's side door wrenched partly open, likely by the panicked chauffeur. He squeezed into the frigid cabin. "Ma'am." His voice was a raw whisper. "Can you hear me?" Silence. Her stillness was terrifying. He gently touched her cheek. Ice. Then he saw it, blazing even in the dim light, the diamond necklace. For a nanosecond, its sheer value registered, a shocking juxtaposition to her dying state. But it was her pulse he searched for, faint, thready, but there, a spark. Getting her out was a brutal, clumsy struggle. She was limp, a dead weight, and his own limbs were stiffening with cold. Finally, he had her free, cradling her for a moment against his own inadequate warmth. He laid her carefully in the snow, then, with fumbling, agonized fingers, unwrapped the wool coat he'd hoarded. He draped it over her, then added his own threadbare blanket, tucking it as best he could. It was so little. It was everything he had. He scanned the blinding white. The distant mansion lights, they were a phantom glow, an almost impossible destination. Leaving her was a death sentence. Taking her it might be his own. But her life, this fragile, unknown life, had become his sole focus. With a sound that was half groan, half prayer, Arthur lifted Eleanor into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, yet the responsibility of her felt immense. "Hold on," he rasped, more to himself than to her. "We're going to make it." Then he turned towards that faint glow and began the agonizing trudge into the heart of the blizzard. Each step was a fresh hell. The snow alternately sucked at his worn-out boots or offered treacherous, icy footing. The wind was a battering ram, stealing his breath, trying to rip Eleanor from his weakening grasp. His own body screamed in protest. The initial searing agony of the cold in his hands and feet began to fade into a dangerous numbness. He knew what that meant. He started talking to her, a low, continuous murmur against the storm's roar, a desperate tether to consciousness, hers and his own. Not far now, just a little further. Stay with me. He told her about Sarah's smile, the scent of sun-warmed roses in their tiny garden, the pride he felt seeing a perfectly joined piece of wood. He painted pictures of warmth with his cracked voice, trying to ward off the encroaching ice in both their souls. He stumbled, falling heavily to one knee, the impact jarring through his exhausted frame. Eleanor slipped, and a raw cry of fear tore from Arthur's throat. He clutched her tighter, his arms screaming, pulling her back. For a terrifying moment, the snowdrifts looked soft, inviting an end to the torment. But he looked down at her face, so pale, so still. A memory surfaced, Sarah, in her last days, her hand in his, whispering, "Be kind, Arthur, always be kind." He gritted his teeth, pushed against the screaming pain in his joints, and rose. He would not fail. Not now. The diamonds around her neck glittered again, catching a stray flake of snow. The thought, insidious and desperate, slithered into his mind. Those could change everything. Food, a warm room, an end to this misery. It was the voice of his own desperate survival. But then he looked at her face again, the delicate curve of her eyelashes against her frozen cheek. Her life, that was the only jewel that mattered. He banished the thought with a surge of protective fury that momentarily warmed him. As she sensed his internal battle, Eleanor moaned a tiny, almost inaudible sound. Her eyelids fluttered. "So cold," she breathed, the words a mere puff of air. But it was a cannon blast to Arthur's flagging spirit. "I know," he gasped, tears freezing on his own cheeks. "Almost there. I promise. Stay with me. You're so strong." The distant light seemed fractionally closer. Or perhaps it was just the desperate hope rekindled by her whisper. He pushed on, one agonizing, heroic step at a time. An eternity later, a dark line resolved itself through the swirling snow. A fence. A high, ornate, wrought-iron fence, almost swallowed by drifts. Beyond it, lights blazed from the windows of a colossal stone house. He'd made it. He'd brought her to safety. He staggered along the fence line, his vision tunneling, searching for an opening. The main gates were massive, bolted, impassable. He hammered on the cold iron, his shouts lost in the wind's howl. No response. Despair, sharp and final, threatened to consume him. So close. Then his desperate gaze caught it, a smaller, humbler service gate. Further down, half hidden, with the last dregs of his will, he lurched towards it. His numb fingers fumbled with the frozen latch. It gave with a rusty shriek. He stumbled through into a sheltered service drive, and finally to a heavy oak door. He twisted the handle. It turned. He practically fell into the dimly lit, blessedly warm utility corridor, lowering Eleanor gently to the stone floor before his own legs gave out. He collapsed beside her, his body still instinctively trying to shield hers, his lungs burning, each breath a ragged tear. He'd done all he could. The world began to spin, and then, gratefully, faded to black. It was Peterson, the estate's elderly, meticulous groundskeeper, who found them, making his storm rounds. He'd seen the service door inexplicably ajar. Peering in, his weathered face went slack with shock. A man, looking like a frozen scarecrow, lay beside a sumptuously dressed woman, both eerily still. His first thought was a terrible crime. He raised the alarm, his voice hoarse with urgency. The corridor soon filled with hushed, anxious figures. Staff, then Eleanor's Aunt Caroline, her face a canvas of fear. Finally, Harrison Ashworth himself appeared, his presence usually radiating an unshakable authority. He saw his daughter, pale as death, and the ragged stranger beside her, his face, already grim, hardened into a mass of controlled fury and stark terror. "Eleanor!" he choked out, rushing to her side. Then his eyes, cold as a storm outside, fixed on Arthur, who was just beginning to stir, his body racked with violent shivers. "Who are you?" Harrison's voice was low, dangerous. "What happened here? What have you done?" The accusation, born of fear and a lifetime of suspicion, hung heavy in the warm air. Arthur tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. The dim light swirled, and darkness reclaimed him. When Arthur next opened his eyes, he was on a cot, cocooned in thick, warm blankets. The searing cold in his limbs had been replaced by a throbbing, insistent ache. A kind-faced doctor with gentle eyes was taking his pulse. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller." Arthur Miller. He managed, his throat raw. "Well, Mr. Miller," the doctor said, "you gave us all quite a scare. Nasty case of exposure. Significant frostbite on your hands and feet. But you're going to be all right. You're incredibly fortunate. And so is Miss Ashworth." "Eleanor," Arthur whispered. "Is she?" "She's alive. Thanks to you," the doctor said, his voice firm. "Severe hypothermia and a concussion, but she regained consciousness a short while ago. In fact," he smiled faintly, "the very first thing she asked, once she could speak, was, 'Where's the man who saved me?'" Indeed, Eleanor, tucked into a luxurious four-poster bed, her head bandaged, had woken with a fractured memory of a desperate face in a blizzard, a voice urging her to hold on. "The man—" She'd rasped to her weeping aunt and the stern-faced doctor. "The one who carried me. He saved my life. He wrapped me in his coat. I need to see him. I must thank him." Her voice, though weak, held an unshakable resolve. Her father, Harrison, had initially been consumed by suspicion. This vagrant, the diamonds, but Eleanor's passionate insistence, combined with the doctor's unequivocal statement that Arthur's actions were the sole reason she was alive, began to erode his steely certainty. The police report from the crash site later confirmed the tragic fate of Thomas, the chauffeur, found miles away, and lauded the unknown Samaritan's tracks leading from the wreck to the mansion. Later that day, after Arthur had managed some warm broth and his frostbitten extremities had been carefully treated, Harrison Ashworth entered the small, warm room where Arthur lay. The tycoon looked different. The sharp edges of his arrogance were gone, replaced by a heavy, humbled weariness. He stood before Arthur, this man he would have dismissed without a second glance just days before. "Mr. Miller," Harrison began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, almost hesitant. I owe you an apology. A profound one. I judged you harshly, wrongly. You saved my daughter's life. There are no words, no sum of money that could ever adequately repay that debt." He paused, his gaze direct, filled with an emotion Arthur had never expected to see in such a man. "Thank you. From a father, thank you." Eleanor, against all medical advice but radiating a newfound, quiet strength, insisted on being helped to Arthur's room. Wrapped in a plush velvet robe, her face still pale but her eyes luminous, she looked at the man who had walked through fire, no, through ice, for her. Tears welled, unbidden. "They told me," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "everything you did. You carried me through that nightmare. You didn't even know me." A tear escaped, tracing a warm path down her cheek. "How can I ever express my gratitude, Mr. Miller?" Arthur, overwhelmed and enused to such earnest praise, felt a warm bloom in his chest that no blanket could provide. Anyone would have tried, ma'am," he mumbled, looking at his bandaged hands. "No," Eleanor said, her voice gaining firmness. Not everyone, Mr. Miller. You did. You're not just a kind man. You're a hero. The diamond necklace, retrieved and placed on her bedside table, now seemed almost insignificant compared to the raw, powerful human connection that filled the modest room. The true diamond-clad secret wasn't the value of the jewels, but the incalculable worth of selfless courage, a worth that had been hidden beneath tattered clothes and a life of hardship. In the weeks of recovery that followed, an unexpected bond formed. Eleanor, learning of Arthur's lost skills, his carpentry, the quiet dignity he'd maintained through years of suffering, saw not a charity case, but a man of immense worth robbed by tragedy. She spoke with her father, her voice imbued with conviction that surprised him. "He doesn't just need a reward, Father," she'd insisted. "He needs a chance to reclaim what was taken from him, his skill, his purpose." Harrison, profoundly changed by the near loss of his daughter and the undeniable nobility of her rescuer, listened, really listened. The Ashworth estate had an old, charmingly dilapidated guest cottage and numerous outbuildings needing skilled hands. They offered Arthur the position of estate carpenter and live-in caretaker. It wasn't charity. It was an offer of respect, a path back to a life of meaning. Arthur accepted, his eyes, for the first time in years, shining not with a reflection of snow, but with unshed tears of profound gratitude and dawning hope. He moved into the cottage as spring began to whisper its first promises to the frozen land. The scent of freshly sawn would soon mingle with the crisp air. His hands, though scarred, rediscovered their old magic, restoring beauty and function to what was neglected. He was no longer Arthur the ghost, but Arthur Miller, the craftsman, a man with a home, with purpose, with a quiet strength that now had a place to flourish. Eleanor, too, was reborn. The ice around her own heart had melted. She found her voice, her purpose. She took the reins of the Ashworth family's charitable foundation, redirecting its vast resources with newfound passion toward initiatives that offered genuine second chances, that sought out the overlooked heroes in their own communities. She and Arthur often shared quiet conversations, sometimes in his workshop amid the wood shavings, sometimes by the grand fireplace in the main house. An unlikely friendship, forged in a blizzard, had blossomed into a rare and beautiful connection, a testament to the enduring power of human empathy. The storm had been crucible, testing and revealing the true nature of those caught in its fury. It had nearly taken lives, but in its wake, it had also swept away pretense and prejudice, revealing that the most precious treasures are not worn around the neck, but carried within the heart. And in the warmth of a new season, Arthur and Eleanor, two souls from different worlds, stood as living proof that kindness, like a beacon in the darkest storm, can indeed change everything.